Okay, we're going to do lesson 4.1, which I know is from an older unit. However, this is going to be a good review for you guys just on your rules of exponents. So we're going to roll with this one first. Starting out with just talking about what our integer exponents are. For those of you guys that don't remember, integers are going to be your whole numbers, including 0, as well as their opposites, is how we're going to be dealing with those. So first off, this group here, whoops, not that group there, got a little crazy. First off, this group right here, we're going to talk about those you guys have definitely done before. Then we'll talk about what does 0 mean, as well as talking about how our negative exponents work. So getting started with this one, if you have a to the nth power, be that right there, that just means a times itself in number of times. So if I have 4 squared, that's the same thing as 4 times 4, which is 16. If I have 2 to the 5th, that's the same thing as 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. So 5 2's multiplied together gives me 32. I feel like you guys remember that part of it. One word of caution that I want to show you guys, and I know we've talked about this, but just to reiterate it, parentheses will matter when you guys are dealing with these. If I have a negative 2 to the 4th power, that means negative 2 to the 4th power. So this means negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. However, if I have a negative 2 to the 4th power, okay, that means that there's a negative 2 to the 4th power. So there's a negative, and then there are 4 2's that are being multiplied together, which gives me negative 16, versus over here, our negatives cancel, and we end up with a positive 16. So make sure you pay attention to those parentheses. They will matter. Okay? So that was just our first part, 1, 2, 3, 4. How do we deal with those? It just tells you how many factors. Okay? So what about when we get to those negative exponents? So what does it mean if you have a negative exponent? Well, essentially, if I have an a to the negative n power, I'm going to rewrite that as an a to the 1 over n power. So basically, if you have a negative exponent, it has to switch sides of the fraction bar. Okay? So where I had an a to the negative n, that moves down to the bottom. Okay? And then the other thing you want to pay attention to is, see how that was a negative n? Well, now on the bottom, it's a positive n. So your rule for this, your negative exponent rule, is going to be to switch sides of fraction bar and change exponent to positive. So when you guys switch sides, it's going to change that to a positive. So if I have a 2 to the negative 1 power, negative exponent means I need to move it to the bottom. So since there's nothing on top, there's always a 1 up there. So that becomes a 1 over 2 to the first power, which 1 over 2 to the first power, 2 to the first power is just 2. So it's just 1/2. Okay? If I have an x to the negative 2, negative exponent means it's got to switch sides. So it's going to go to the bottom. Again, I'd have a 1 left up top, and then that becomes a positive 2 on the bottom. Next one down here we have is a little bit different. This one is 1 over y to the negative 4. So all the negative does is switch sides of the fraction bar. So this one, you move it up, and you make it positive. Do I have to have the 1 on the bottom? No, this could just be a y to the 4th. So negative exponents are just going to cause us to switch sides of the fraction bar. Okay? Then, the last one that we haven't talked about, what about our 0 power? Okay, what is something to the 0 power equal? Well, here's a way that you can figure it out. We've already made this whole list up here. Okay? 2 to the 5th, we know that's 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, which gives us 32. Okay, we talked about that on one of the previous slides there. So 2 to the 5th power just gives me 32. 2 to the 4th power gives me 16. 2 cubed gives me 8. 2 squared is 4. 2 to the first power, we didn't really talk about that, but if there's only one 2, it's just itself. Anything to the first power is just itself. 2 to the 0, we're not sure on. 2 to the negative 1, remember that moves down to the bottom. It becomes a 1 over 2 to the first power, which a 2 to the first power would just be a 2, so that's 1/2. And then 2 to the negative 2, move that to the bottom, that's 1 over 2 squared. Well, what is 2 squared? 2 squared would be 4, so that becomes 1/4. Okay? So basically what I'm going to ask you guys to do is I'm going to ask you guys to try and find a pattern. So what's a pattern that you see either as you're moving up or as you're moving down? Hopefully you guys have had a chance to think about it. I've heard people say that things are being multiplied by 2. I've heard people say that things are being divided by 2. Both are true. If I divide 32 by 2, that gives me 16. 16 divided by 2 gives me 8. 8 divided by 2 gives me 4. So every single one of these steps, we are dividing by 2. And that continues on. Well, what is 2 divided by 2? Well, 2 divided by 2 would give me 1. Does that pattern still continue? What is 1 divided by 2? Well, 1 divided by 2 gives me 1/2. 1/2 divided by 2 gives me 1/4. So yes, that pattern continues. And that tells us that 2 to the 0 power equals 1. And in fact, that is true for anything to the 0 power. So anything to the 0 power is 1. And our way that we can write that is a to the 0 power equals 1. It does not matter what your base is. Anytime something is to the 0 power, it automatically becomes a 1.